Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Intellects in Conversation podcast. My guest is renowned scholar and educator, Professor Nigel Lezama. Welcome to the show, Nigel. It's great to see you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Well, to start off the chat, I wanted to kick off by asking, where are you actually calling in from?
I am in Toronto, colonially known as Toronto, and I am a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University. I teach in the School of Fashion. Can
you just briefly tell us a little bit more about about yourself in terms of your research interests and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I am trained as a 19th century literary historian, which I've come a long way since. And I worked on Baudelaire and Eugène Sue. So I worked on high and low literature in the 19th century, looking at like marginalized figures and their representation and their fashionable representation, or the representation of their fashion and self-fashioning. And I was a professor in 19th century French literature for about 10 years, and I've just started now in the School of Fashion, where I teach fashion studies, specifically like fashion theory and inclusion in our undergraduate and our graduate program.
Very cool. I love this transition from sort of modernism and modernist literature, French literature into fashion. How did that happen for you?
I have to be honest, like I am where I always wanted to be. That's definitely true. But I don't know that I had a plan, like I just did. As a scholar, I worked on the things that spoke to me. And so in 19th century literature, I was looking at figures like the prostitute, the dandy, and in French we'd say le pauvre, the working poor, and I was able to sort of develop a theory around, or like a praxis, that marginalized people and communities, that their use of fashion to challenge the center, challenge dominant culture. And from there, I just kept seeing connections. And I would think about the dandy, the 19th century dandy, and sort of his high and low life, because it wasn't all luxury, it wasn't all glamour. And there was a real sort of challenge to the meanings of those terms. And I would see that same kind of praxis in drag culture, like in 90s ballroom, and then I would see it in hip hop. And so I would sort of apply that lens to these other cultural expressions that were more contemporary, and see if that thinking held. And so from there, I ended up sort of really sort of diving deep into like hip hop culture and drag, and it was just so like fun, to work on these things and use these theories that I developed elsewhere or in another context. And so I just stayed there. And so I published quite a bit, much more in through fashion studies and like in hip hop and drag than I had really done in 19th century. And so I just stayed there, and I managed to make a shift. Just last year, I started in January of this year at the School of Fashion.
Well, congratulations on the appointment and on falling on your feet in terms of where you wanted to be all along with the research opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that transition. You take me back, because I remember reading Baudelaire and talking about the flaneur and the dandy and
yes,
but I never thought about applying that to sort of hip hop culture or drag, which of course two subjects that are things that Intellect specializes in. Of course, we have the Diamond Open Access Journal Global Hip Hop Studies, for example.
Yes.
So just tell me a little bit about some of the research that you've done around hip hop and drag. Is it together or two separate projects?
No, they've been like two separate projects. Like the way I work, I'm a little bit like, sort of like the flaneur and like the le collectionneur, the collector in the 19th century, that I just go around picking up things that like interest me, right? And so like what my hip hop work has been really in the spirit of dandyism, right? So that we we can think about hip hop, especially like hip hop and its relationship to luxury. And I have always been a little bit suspicious of the idea that hip hop uses luxury aspirationally, right? Because I think like to have an aspirational relationship to like luxury in its sort of like dominant form is to say that we like the system the way it is. You know, like aspiration is to aspire to something that exists, whereas hip hop is transformative. Hip hop transform. You know, that's I think at the heart of hip hop is to make something from nothing. And so when I looked at hip hop, when I looked at like sort of earlier hip hop, like if we think about like Lottie Dottie,
like sorry, the 80s, kind of like the slick
exactly,
Rick,
right? So
kind of
this idea of like gold teeth and Gucci underwear, like it doesn't mean the same thing. It can't, you know, when even though it's using these tools of dominant culture, there's a transformation that's happening in the same way that with dandyism, like Beau Brummel in the early 19th century. I remember he was with some of his friends, and he had like this acerbic wit, and so one of his like more well-born friends, if you would want to call them friends, had on a new coat and was like, "Do you like my new coat?" And Brummel said, "You call this thing a coat?" And so by saying this, right, like there's some philosophers who've like deconstructed that very famous saying, and like, you know, to call a thing the coat, it's no longer to be what it is. Like, and you may think that you're wearing a coat, but Brummel and his dandyism is saying, I don't think so. You know, like it's something else, right? And so there's a real challenge to like that central dominant idea of what luxury and what it represents socially. And that's the link.
No, I like it, and I agree. I think that's really really interesting. I think maybe we might need to tap you up for a contribution to global hip hop studies at some point on that. That sounds really, really interesting. Talking about transformation and transformative, that aspect of hip hop is something that I personally particularly find fascinating about it. But that does lead me nicely onto a question I wanted to ask you about sort of fashion and social change and some of the work that you're doing through your teaching at your new position. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about some of that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. When I came on board in the School of Fashion at TMU, they hired me as a professor of fashion studies and inclusion. So, and I think you can also get the gist, like sort of that has always been sort of part of my thinking, right? Like, I guess I can back up a little bit. Like I'm an immigrant to Canada. I came with my family, my parents, when I was very young, so 3. And, you know, we came from Trinidad, and so we had very little. You know, my parents had very, very little. They aren't university educated. I was the first in our family to go to university. But that aspect of my identity, I think, remained formative to me, right? And so I've always felt that I'm in some way in the margins of a broader society. And so it's a certain sensitivity, and it's not one that I would like to change. I think there's a certain way of seeing things and a certain clear-eyedness that comes from that kind of perspective. And so when in my teaching now, and this is something that like over time has, you know, I've thought about, and as I prepare, you know, courses and think about the readings I want to do. So as I've come to TMU and I'm teaching this introductory class to 300 students in fashion theory, I want to make sure that I'm speaking to all of my students in their broad and varied experiences, understanding that some of us may have a real acute sense of some aspect of our marginality, and others wouldn't have that for a number of reasons, whether that's because of race, because of class, because of gender, and so my readings are always based in other ways of seeing things, whether it's other ways of looking at aspects of dominant culture, fashion and luxury aspects, or ways that marginalized cultures, or cultures that we're not going to necessarily, cultures and practices that we're not going to necessarily think of as luxurious. We can look at those and then draw out the luxury practices, the creation of luxury that's happening in these spaces. Because as marginalized, or in the experience of marginalization, we have to create luxuries for ourselves. And so while we don't necessarily have, or we don't always have financial access or economic access to like branded luxuries, we create those nevertheless in our lives. And so that's something that I try to really get my students to think about in their own work. And that's like whether they are immigrants, racialized, or like, very comfortably situated in the center as white and male, because even those constructions like are constructions, and so we have to live up to those. So you're not just that, you're trying to be something, or you're working against the borders of it, so I try to keep that kind of thinking in our class, that kind of sensitivity.
Thank you, Nigel. That's really fascinating to hear. And of course, I also hear you mention luxury, which is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today as well. And not a nice segue for me in a sense, because I mean, in terms of your work with Intellect, we've published, your edited collection in Canadian Critical Luxury Studies, and of course, which you edited with Jessica Clark, I believe. And then on top of that, of course, you're on our editorial board for the Luxury Studies Journal that we publish as well. So I did want to ask you a little bit about luxury. I thought, why don't we start off with the term itself? Because I think it's a term that's kind of maligned or misunderstood, especially in sort of, I suppose, kind of mainstream culture. And like often people only think about Rolexes and they don't think about maybe artisanal crafts people and things like that, who are producing bespoke, fine, items, artifacts, or things that come from a long tradition. So what's kind of luxury? What does it mean to you? Do you have a specific definition? Is it quite fluid? How do you kind of like encapsulate it?
I have a very specific definition.
And that's kind of nice, actually.
And it's, it's something that has evolved over time. It's something that was sort of innate, or in the sense that it was in me and it was a feeling that I had. And then through the work I've done and through like the collaborations that I've had the pleasure of sort of participating in, it has grown or evolved or sort of become like sort of more clear. It's funny, I don't know, I have a memory that comes to mind, and I think this, I'll start with an anecdote and then I'll go to a definition. When I was young, I was probably about 10 to 12 in that age range. And I always had like an eye to fashion and glamour and an idea of luxury without knowing the word to a certain extent. And at some point we'd gone on a family trip to Buffalo. My parents loved going to the States to get like, bargains and stuff. And so we'd gone to Buffalo and there was this like satin jacket. It was like a baseball jacket. It was pink and red, with like piping. And I thought, oh my God, I need this jacket. Mommy, I need it. And she bought it for me. I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. And so I had this jacket. And so someday I decided I was going to wear it to school, but I was going to wear it properly. And so I have a younger sister, and I took her jeans. I said, I'm going to wear your jeans today. She wasn't super happy, but I was the older brother. And so I put on her jeans that was like it was like denim with a bit of purple in it. Nice. And I squeezed myself into these jeans with this jacket. I don't remember what I was wearing on top. And I put on my church shoes, and I had those Michael Jackson glitter socks. Nice. And I wore that. And that encapsulates what luxury is for me. Right? Luxury is like, it's a personal choice that's made that enriches the life of the person experiencing it. And so in that outfit, I created this luxurious experience for myself to go out into the world and show myself how I was, how I am still. And so for me, that is what luxury is. Luxury is ultimately an experience either with like a material or an immaterial thing, we'll say, that enriches the life of the person experiencing it. And it's idiosyncratic in that sense, right? It's absolutely personal. So a Rolex for me will be different from a Rolex for you, from a Rolex for someone else, but that doesn't mean that the Rolex itself cannot create that luxurious experience.
I really like that, a utilitarian kind of viewpoint. Yeah, that's really nice. It kind of, in some ways, it reminds me of a bit of my own experience as well. Very different, but growing up in rural England and being really into hip hop culture and it being very foreign and being the age that I am, there wasn't like access via the internet in the same way. But you did have like richer friends who would go to Orlando to go to Disney, Universal, and all the usual stuff, and you'd save up to give one of these people your pocket money, as it were, so that they could get maybe like a starter hat or like a pair of Nike Cortezes or something affiliated with sort of hip hop culture, which to me was, that was my notion of luxury, was having something from this foreign land, representing this foreign culture, that I could then sort of like, I could feel almost like it was almost my, my growing identity, which is kind of, funny, because a lot of my friends would take the mick out of me, would make jokes at my expense, because it was totally foreign and different to them, and they didn't see any kind of correlation between that and why you'd want to wear this stuff. Of course, a few years later, things did change in popular culture, and then of course everyone was asking
you were the game,
my jeans from, and all the rest of it. But yeah, no, that's funny. I do really like that, and I think luxury is one of those things that's defined in many ways by different people. But I think that's a really nice way of looking at it. Did you find that your kind of your heritage or your kind of like early life experience and maybe things to do with class as well, do you think that like kind of affected how you define luxury?
Absolutely. I think I would say it's maybe even in reaction to, right? I think I do have like a strong sort of like Marxist grounding to my thinking, and which people often find strange, like when I'm thinking, when I'm working in luxury and fashion, but I do understand in that Bourdieusian sense, so like a neo-Marxist way, like that, like these are like objects, we can call them cultural capital in that sense, and they're used sort of as weapons in this social game of positioning, right? And so we use luxury to like push ourselves up to, and then maybe like, and then it shifts to keep people down. You know what I mean? There is like a real sort of class element to consumption, to luxury, and that is quite central to my thinking. But I also understand like the ideas of intersectionality, and that I think that like Marxist thinking and like, or a class specific way of thinking can sort of like overshadow these other elements that are also at play in the ways that we position ourselves in society, the ways that we self-fashion and see ourselves, so the class for sure, but I think race, age, gender, all of those things are at play.
Okay. Yeah, so you wouldn't sort of pigeonhole yourself as being kind of specific. It sounds like you're more interested in sort of intersectionality and different ways of doing things.
And those are things that that come over through work and through research, and as I think more about things, that thinking about, for a while I was a very hard Marxist, but exactly.
Yeah, there has to be a bit of give in there at some point, doesn't it? I think. Well, let's continue talking a little bit about luxury, though. But I wanted to ask you, what do you sort of think the future looks like for luxury, both as an industry and as sort of an academic area of study? Is this an interesting time for luxury? Is it progressive? Is there what's kind of interest to you at the moment, and maybe from an industrial standpoint, and then also from like kind of the area of study itself?
Yeah, I think that like this is an interesting time. for luxury. And I think it's an interesting time because I think it gets more and more grotesque as time goes on. And so, and it's not to say that I don't, of course, I love some luxury item and lots, who knows, maybe later I'll confess some things, but,
Yeah.
but I think that, economically, I think that, globally, things are pretty bad. And I think that that divide is getting, bigger and bigger. The rich are getting richer, and there's just no understanding or there's a refusal to understand that perpetual growth on a finite planet it's not a viable solution, right? It's not sustainable. And so, and luxury is guilty of it, probably more than any other industry. And so in that sense, I think that luxury is, in terms of as an industry, luxury is at the heart of the problems that we're facing, because luxury is such a symbolic space. And so while production, fast fashion is probably far more damaging than luxury, but it's the ideas of luxury that fuel that kind of consumption, and the creation of a kind of luxury of excess that really doesn't work. And if we think about it closely, it's antithetical, I think, in that sense.
Do you think that luxury is can ever be sort of sustainable? Because I know there's a lot of people trying to push that angle through things like, I don't know, diamond mining and tracking diamonds from when they come out the ground to when they end up in someone's pocket, so that they can use blockchain and things of that nature to try and eradicate blood diamonds or something along those lines. And I know there's quite a lot of things like that being pushed by these corporate entities to be like, no, look, we're doing sustainable things. Do you think that's compatible, or is that incompatible?
Impossible. You have to believe, you have to believe them first, right? And the trouble there, I think, is just that these are multinational corporations, and they they answer to shareholders, right? And so, and shareholders demand profits. So right now, I think right now we're in a period of a slowdown in luxury, from what I've been reading in the past few weeks in the industry. And and it's in terms of headlines, it's cause for concern. Luxury is unstabilized, but I mean, how much do you really need? But there are, I think luxury can be sustainable. I think there are in many different ways, right? I think we can think about craft and smaller productions. In Canada, we have so many Indigenous communities and nations that have these marvelous practices that are absolutely sustainable and have been sustainable since the beginning, because they understand the idea of a relationship with human and non-human relations. I mean, it's a bit double statement there, but you know what I mean. And so there are ways to create luxurious experiences and luxurious objects in sustainable ways. And outside of consumption, I think there are other practices that we can treat as luxurious, and I think about in Black communities, we can talk about the hand-me-downs, in cultures, and those an individual is not forced to, but I mean, you get when your cousin, in my case, I got my cousin's hand-me-downs, but how do you spin it and make it your own, and we understand that it's the individual investment in these experiences that makes them luxurious. And in that sense, once you've invested in something as a luxury, it becomes precious to you, and it isn't as disposable, and it sort of slows down that consumption cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You just made me think a little bit about. I was a privileged position. I've had the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time at the National Institute of Design and the National Institute of Technology in India, which university organizations that have a number of campuses all across the country.
Yes.
And when I was spending time there doing workshops on publishing and trying to develop partnerships and publishing outputs that they were creating, one of the things which was really cool is that they had all of these, for want of a better term, artisanal crafts folk from rural communities across India who they were bringing in to teach these oral traditions, to teach these, incredible historical practices around all different kinds of craft, I guess, but like that this was all part of luxury studies. And they were like, the luxury here is that, we don't have the luxury of letting these people pass without passing down this information. And It was all about cataloging and also integrating that into modern fashion design and into other forms of design and technological development and how they can integrate this. And I'm kind of spitballing and going up on a tangent, but I found it really, really kind of like fascinating that was the core value that they were kind of focusing on, was like to ensure that the traditions carry on and that they integrate with modern ways rather than being left, because they are ultimately amazing skills and things that need to be kind of fostered.
Absolutely. It's totally, luxury and also a right, you know what I mean? Like these communities need to carry on cultural practices, right? And so there's also the question of like, this is a right for these communities. And there are they are skilled, it's skilled practices, it's refined practices that, if we think about it from sort of even the more traditional definition of luxury, they are bona fide luxuries, made, by skilled craftspeople, using specific materials and maybe rarefied materials, and that they aren't mass produced. All of that, for all of those reasons, they are luxuries that we're talking about.
Well, again, another aspect of luxury I wanted to talk about today was, of course, your own work that you've published with Intellect. And I think maybe I'll start off with the Journal of Luxury Studies, which I know you're not on the official editorial team, but you're part of the board and contributing. I just was interested to get your take on why that is like an important forum, really for the study of luxury, like that kind of like why the journal is a good kind of means to kind of to present that kind of research. And then maybe I thought you might have a couple of tips for anyone who might be interested in submitting something. What would you like to kind of see from people as a board member? What would you love to review? Is there any kind of topics that you would like to see a bit more of, perhaps? And what is it special about this journal that people should consider submitting to it?
Absolutely. What I think is the great sort of potential of this journal is that, for one thing, like Sean and Veronica are they're great thinkers, but what they are, they really have this tie to industry or this industry focus that, as an academic, many of us don't have, right? And we work sort of in isolation, and we think about things in ideal ways, or you know what I mean? And I'm guilty of it too. I can remain really quite closed in ideals without thinking of the real world implications of that. And Sean and Veronica are very real world thinkers, and so the journal is this space, the sort of like connecting space between academia and industry. And so the work that comes out in there really does speak to the people who can make actual real changes, and comes from those people. And so a lot of times there, the journal has sort of industry focused articles, sometimes craft, there'll be like sort of historical analyses, but what I think the editors do is they really try to ensure that the journal engages with the world, and we're not just to ourselves. And that, I think, is very important for all academic work. Like, I think, we we do this because we believe that we're bringing something of value into the world, ideas of value into the world. And the best way to turn those ideas into actions is to like share it with the world. And so the journal, I think, is this really great space where these two worlds meet and can share ideas. Articles that, like, things that I would love to see, and I like, in terms of scholars who are thinking of scholars or industry people who are thinking of submitting to the journal. The thing about luxury is that it's well worn, and its richness, but also I think its weakness is that everybody has an idea about luxury. Everybody. and a lot of times it's, it remains sort of like a hegemonic idea, or like an idea that comes from the center where, luxury are these, are these brands that promote ideas of craft and rarity and exclusivity and all of those things. But really all it comes down to is cost at that level. Price, I would say. And so, because we know from the scandal in Italy that cost and price are two different things, utterly. But what that means is for the journal and for potential interventions in the journal is that I think we have to think about the ethics of luxury. We have to think about stories that aren't always told, or that aren't told often, or what are the unexpected areas of luxury and luxury experiences and I would say that that we don't hear very often. So I get sort of excited when I see work that is looking at ways that, again, as like marginalized or not as spoken about practices, how they are imbued with luxury, how they challenge the dominant system, ways that we can make the system more transparent, those kind of things. I think that if we're going to start speaking about luxury, we have to, I think, rethink it. I see a lot of, I have, in my new position, I have access to all kinds of students, in French literature, you like meets like, but here in the School of Fashion, I have all kinds of students that sort of look me up or see me online or see me here, see me there, and they want to come and see me and talk about luxury, and they bring their work, and it's all like Cap Ferrer and Bastien, and it's all like, what is it, HEC, in Paris, and I'm like, this is interesting, but have you read my book?
Yes. Hey, we've all got to be ruthless self-promoters in this gig, that's for sure.
But and how can we rethink luxury? I don't think luxury needs any more stimulus. I don't think we need to find more ways for luxury to sell its bill of goods.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think people, especially when they're undergrads, for example, they're encountering a lot of these things for the first time. So it's like this amazing world of luxury, and like focusing on the fleur de mal and planeurs and luxury in the French context and all these other things are so attractive. It almost blindsides people from thinking about what maybe we need to do to push the study forward, especially when people are younger and less experienced. I think that it's easy to get kind of caught up with these traditional notions and finding your place within that rather than kind of breaking down those barriers. I think I was definitely guilty of that, writing on hip hop and things like that maybe as well when I was an undergraduate. So I can kind of get it. Sorry, I think I cut you off there. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I think in terms of like what I would ask like potential contributors to think about is, like, instead of thinking about ways that we can like spur consumption and spur the industry, think about ways that we can rethink
Hmm.
the industry and rethink consumption. And that, I think there just needs to be more of that in, like we need more alternative ideas.
Well, look, this is a good forum for that. So, we have a new issue of Luxury Studies, Suit of Luxury Journal, published by Intellect. Forthcoming, there'll be a new issue out, available soon. And of course, anyone who's interested in finding out a bit more about this journal, they can download a free issue, and there's a number of open access articles that people can download and look at as well. So I'd urge people to do that. But yeah, let's use this as an opportunity to encourage calls, call for papers, and of course submissions on these areas. Let's break down these barriers, and let's take a new approach. But yeah, there's an open call for papers online, intellectbooks.com, journal, Luxury Studies Journal, and then you can go from there and submit your own work directly to the website. So yeah, let's use this as an opportunity to solicit interesting new content. Moving on though, let's talk a little bit about luxury in the Canadian context, or certainly in the context of your own book, which you published with Intellect towards the end of 2022, I believe, from memory. An excellent book it is as well, Canadian Critical Luxury Studies. I think I mentioned earlier that it was co-edited with Jessica Clark.
Yes.
And I guess the book really, for me, remains highly relevant, tackles Canada's historical, economic, and cultural relationship to luxury. But in your own words, can you just tell us a little bit about the book, how it came to be, or more importantly, what it's sort of about? And then maybe you could highlight a few of the contributions or a few of the chapters that you think are perhaps most prescient, now it's been out in the world for a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. It was published in 2022. A lot of the work we did through the pandemic, and what would I say? So the book it's a Canadian Critical Luxury Studies. Decentring Luxury is the title. And so what Jessica and I wanted to do with this book and with our contributors was to rethink luxury, decenter it, in the sense that looking at how luxury operates when you're outside of like these dominant centers of luxury and hegemonic centers that are also tied to like long histories of like colonialism and imperialism, right? So when you talk about like fashion cities like Paris, London, New York a bit later, but in terms of like economic hegemony there, luxury can function really like almost in a one-to-one relationship, like, so things work really, it's a finely tuned, well-oiled machine. But when luxury leaves those spaces and comes to like a space like this cities in Canada, for example, what we were able to sort of gather from the various interventions from the various contributors in the book and their work was that luxury doesn't transfer so smoothly, and that in these sort of settler colonial spaces, we have an opportunity to see like some of the failures of luxury, or we get to see some of the ways that and that people and communities are able to sort of rejig the idea of luxury so that it works for them. The book was divided into 3 sections. So there was like, the first section was Resurgence and Revision, was entitled Resurgence and Revision. The second section was Space and Place, and then the third and final section was entitled Futures of Luxury, or something along those lines. And so the first part of the book really looked at it. There were 3 chapters in that. There was the first one was an introduction, not an introduction, but a discussion with Riley Kucherin, who's an Anishinaabe scholar who works with me in the School of Fashion now. And so Jessica, Riley, and I, we had a discussion about Indigenous luxury and resurgence, and we wanted to start the book off with this discussion because we felt that in terms of a discussion, it's a less formal structure, so it's a little more open to big ideas and to like bouncing off of each other as we were sharing our thoughts and our ideas. and also to like really sort of emphasize the, you know, our subtitle, Decentring Luxury. And so Riley discussed, you know, like he had a number of like sort of like ideas that went through his intervention, but he discussed what is inherently luxurious in indigenous making, in indigenous practices. He discussed how, what would I say? The importance of looking at these modes of production, and you know, that we're in sort of circular systems where a maker also knows the person who's like the hunter who you know, shot the deer, the person who tanned the hide, down to the person who finishes the craft work, right? So it's a sort of like community center, like where the skills are, you know, are all tied to each other, and the potential for economic growth to stay within that community and not sort of be outsourced into these different areas, or to become sort of depersonalized in that way. And so that's how we started the book. And then Jessica is a historian. She's a historian of empires of 19th century. And she looked at sort of 3 moments in Canada's history, and looking at how luxury, the idea of luxury, was imposed through, you know, from an imperial lens, and that alienated or wrote over certain local realities in those spaces. So when she looked at the fur trade, for example, she really was able to sort of like show how fur, you know, in its preparation in North America in the 17th century, it was a highly skilled process that required required specific knowledge and talents and skills that meant that the hide itself was a luxury, whereas it was treated as a raw material, as if like it just came and went over to, you know, London to be turned into top hats. Sure. You know, so you know, she really showed, you know, this the discourses that would write over the luxurious realities that did already exist.
I think that's really cool. I think that's something that, again, one of those historical periods and facts that you can take and use as a lens to kind of better understand our own time and our own distance from the, you know, the raw materials and how they're produced and manufactured, of course, often far away from where they end up and things like that. That's interesting. I can see that's a lovely continuation from that earlier chapter as well on indigenous luxury.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was a real sort of story being told, and I don't want to go too much in the weeds of the book because I'll be here forever otherwise. Yeah. But like in the second, I'll sort of speak generally. Like in the second section, Space and Place, we had 2 chapters. One was by Catherine Franklin and Rebecca Halliday, who wrote about Toronto Fashion Week, and looking at sort of like this sort of on again, off again fashion event, luxurious event, glamorous event in Toronto that really had trouble, has troubles, or had, I don't know, it's no longer operational, but had these troubles really sort of finding a footing and finding a voice, and looking at the trouble of importing, you know, this luxurious model that works well in Paris or New York, with space in Toronto where there's tensions between the local and the national. There's, you know, ideas about like what can we call Toronto fashion in the way that Paris fashion is France. In a sense, you know, they've been working on that since Louis XIV. So, you know, those kind of tensions. And then we looked at in the next chapter was like a scholar, her name is Jessica Pollock O'Neill, who looked at public artworks, and so the creation of luxurious spaces and places, and the stories again that are overwritten when like capital and public art commissions come into play, and commodification of those spaces like writes over like sort of really sort of like rich histories of other communities that have been in those spaces, whether they're indigenous communities or working class communities. And she showed really that sort of, I would say, imperialist kind of drive of luxury to dominate spaces. And the final section was the futures of luxury. We had 2 chapters there, and they really focus on tech, like sort of how technology and luxury can work, not to like, quantify and to, and to sort of push forward this like hyper-futuristic idea of luxury, but like technology could be used also to enrich the experience of the wearer. If it's in terms of wearables, that there were the writer there, Valérie Lamontagne, she wrote about the ways that fashion tech wearables can enrich the life of the wearer, because there's things that are playing with the wearer. It's not like functional use to like, check my heart rate and how many hours I've slept. We don't need to know that. That is not luxury. But to sort of force like this kind of like aspect of play into life. So clothing that doesn't really work with you, it kind of works against you, it scratches you, it pushes you. It was really quite a fun chapter, that one.
I think you curated a classic there. I really like the flow of the chapters and the range of topics that you guys were able to cover, and of course the range of voices also that you were able to curate and to provide space for. And you've just done a tremendous job of trying to encapsulate what is a really complex and a lot of history and a big book. So eloquently. So what I want to do for anyone who's listened through the podcast so far, if you would like to purchase a copy of this book, when you're in the basket at the end, if you just put in the code INTELLECT20, that when you're buying this book specifically, that will get you a 20% discount for the next 3 months, which will take us into 2025. So if anyone's up for buying the book, you can get that discount using the code INTELLECT20 when you pop that into the basket at the end. So thank you, Nigel. Really appreciate you explaining that. And it's just a book that I really enjoyed like dipping in and out of. And you know what? I think I might have to go back and reread bits of it. I know you're going to have to shoot off in a bit, but what I wanted to do before I let you get away is I wanted to ask you a few what I call QuickTime questions. So a little bit more lighthearted than some of the stuff we've been discussing. So I might press you for a few of those answers about brands and luxury and artisans and things like that. But yeah, no need to go into too much depth with these answers, but I would love to get your take on a few of them. So let's start off with that question about luxury brands or specific artisans or individuals. Do you have any favorites? Is there anything that you're like, yeah, that's me?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'll try not to be as long-winded as I am by nature. I would say Telfar, Luar, Pierre Moss, and most recently, those have been like sort of long-standing loves of mine, but Willy Chavaria. So these American designers, these racialized designers who are doing really interesting things that I think we can think about theoretically, and things that I teach them, like they are like sort of my go-to examples for things in class. I love them. And some of them are like have a higher price point. So I don't own them as yet. And some,
aspirational.
Yes, we'll say, and others, like I think are more reasonable, reasonably priced. But we'll say you can take from that what you want. But they create aspects of luxury in the experience of it, whether it's through community. When you go out with a Telfar bag, you already have like a world of friends. When they see yours, you see theirs. So. Those would be like I think my most current go-to luxury heartthrobs.
Well, thank you for sharing those, because I think many of our listeners may not be familiar with all of those either. So hopefully people can go and check some of that out. So thanks for doing that. But I was going to ask you a fairly obvious question, but one about luxury again. What's the most luxurious item you own? Now, how you define that is up to you, based on what we've had conversations about so far. But yeah, what's the most luxurious item that you own?
It's funny that's a complicated question.
Yeah, it's a little tricky one.
Yeah, like I have some, like when I was younger, I could spend money and I could spend, and you know what, there was a time when luxury was still like branded luxury was still sort of attainable in a way. Like, so as a younger person, like I remember, like I wanted, as I graduated university, like my undergrad, and it's a long time ago, and I wanted a Louis Vuitton wallet because I thought it was the wallet that all old ladies had. And, and there was, and obviously I think we're going into something like the, moneyed luxury or something like that at the time. This is before like it had expanded to everywhere.
Supreme collabs and all of that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But I would say, so I've got like lots of bags. But I would think when I finished my PhD, I was like, you know what? I want a watch. And so I bought a vintage Cartier Santos, and that I think remains special for a number of reasons, right? I mean, there was the aspirational in it, like I can't help it, so you have to spend the poverty out of you.
I like that.
But there's also like the time that I saved for it, that I went around looking all over the place for it. I found it in New York, and that remains, like I see it, I wear it. And to me, it's quite, it means a lot.
And I think watches they're interesting because it's one of the items that you instantly, kind of, as a cliched luxury item, it's what you think of. But then it's also something, it's a worn item, isn't it? And it has, form and function, as long as it still tells the time, I guess. But, I think, it sounds like a really special piece. And, I think also when you have those vintage pieces that have been worn and loved by others, or not, maybe they were just in a rich old lady's jewelry collection that never actually saw the light of day, perhaps that one opera one evening. But yeah, no, I think there's that there's if it could speak kind of thing, the memories it would have and all of that stuff. I think it kind of adds to the mystique and adds to the luxurious nature of it. But equally, I think that's sort of the pains that you went to spatially moving around the country to find one, or in terms of hustling and saving money to be able to acquire it in the first place is all part of that sort of luxurious story, isn't it? So that's an interesting one. Thank you for sharing with us. Jumping about a little bit though, I wanted to ask what are you currently reading? It could be edifying theoretical stuff or just a fiction, poetry, whatever.
Yeah, these days I've been really sort of digging deep into theories and sort of cultural studies and that kind of thing. I'm reading and historical analyses. And so like it really is sort of instrumental reading. I'm preparing classes, I'm preparing research, all of these things, but I love it. It's not like, it's not quite like a page turner necessarily, but like it's stuff that I love to read. And so I'm reading Maxine Berg's last book on slavery and capitalism, and it's a marvelous sort of retelling of that history, of the link between slavery and the development or the expansion of capitalism through the 18th and 19th, maybe and the 17th century, right? 17th, 18th, 19th century. And she does like this marvelous job of uncovering in the British context the like essential and important links of slavery that allowed capitalism to flourish. And she sort of looks back at Eric Williams, original work from, I think, the 60s on slavery and capitalism, and she sort of like puts that in its place because I think that had been sort of pashad. And so she's really sort of like, I think it's like really writing history with this book. I love it. And I'm reading another book called, what is it? Between the Disco Ball and Me. And so that's like it's like a praxis of queer gay life. Queer Black Life, sorry. And I just started it. It was my friend Jessica sent it to me, like the picture. I was like, I need this. And I got it, and I'm reading it now, and I've only just started the foreword, but like the way that the writer is telling the story, it's so personal, it's so ethnographic, but in a way that he's speaking his language, and and you get to understand like who he was as a person through this. I'm so excited to sort of go deeper into this and hopefully put it into my new class in January, some part of it.
Very cool. And yeah, I can see how it's a nice to have a couple of options there to go to. One's a little more lighthearted than the other potentially as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, really interesting. It's always nice to hear what people are reading, especially speaking to people who still read, of course, which is always good. Although, of course, there are a lot of great podcasts at the moment, I think, which are dealing with similar topics, which might be good entry points for people on their way to picking up books such as those. And speaking about entry points, I wanted to ask you if you were a big watcher of sort of film and television.
Yes, in sort of like I watch. I think, like many academics, I have a great deal of anxiety, and so I watch some of the same things over and over again to sort of like finish working to like sort of like soothe the mind.
Well, we publishers suffer from the same anxiety, it seems, and utilize these shows and things like that for the same nurturing processes.
Right, and so I've just gone back into How to Get Away with Murder, which is for some reason that show calms the savage beast in me, and so I watched that like at the end of my night just to sort of like feel that I'm not alone in anxiety, and I see how these people can get over theirs through murder. So I watched that fairly regularly, and I've sort of started trying to like sort of spend an evening, like a weekend evening, watching a movie or two and seeing. And sort of like changing my mind in other ways. And I just saw The Substance. The Substance, that's with Demi Moore. Demi Moore, and I forget the name of the actress. It's the daughter of Andy McDowell. And it's a movie about an actress who's reached sort of middle age, and she's like losing her value in the Hollywood system, and she takes it very hard, and so she takes, I'm going to shorten it, she takes a substance to find her younger self.
Right.
And her younger self like comes out of her back, like it's horrific, and so she's become this split person now, this absolutely magnetic younger self that everyone falls instantly in love with, and then her older self, and how they like play against each other. And it was so traumatizing, I had to stop it. Like, so I didn't finish it. I was like, there was, I don't know, art imitating life. I don't know, but I had to stop it.
It sounds like both you and Demi got more than you bargained for with that one.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to shift it up a little bit again, and I just wanted to ask you about cities and places. Is there a particular city that you love to visit? I mean, not the one you're based in, but is there somewhere else that you love to visit? And what city might that be?
Paris, always Paris.
Always right. Paris. Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense with both.
Better. Okay. Yeah. It's the city where it's so funny. Like I arrive, I get off the plane, and I feel like I've grown 2 inches.
Yeah,
and my are longer, and like it's just. I love everything about it. I love the fight that it takes to be in Paris. You have to fight your way through Paris. And I love the culture of being out all the time. So you finish work, you don't just run home to make dinner. You stop at a cafe, you sit, you look at people, you meet people, you have a few glasses of wine, and then you make your way home for whatever there are. I love it. It's my favorite place.
That's really an interesting way of describing Paris, because I forget that sometimes, because sometimes I get a bit overwhelmed by like the tourism and how almost of a parody of itself, or it can become. But that's also because I'm probably there often on with when our last few times I've been there anyway, it's been on business, and I've been running around, and maybe I haven't had time to be the flaneur, and enjoy it unfolding around me. But being based in the US now, and I imagine it's similar to some degree in Canada too, is what you're describing, Paris, that notion of like walking home and the buzz and the hub, but stopping and having a coffee or a drink, and a little browser, a little snack or something, and just it just seems very civilized. I will give you that. And then also quite different, but from a UK perspective, not again that people can necessarily afford to do it so much these days, nor are there as many of them. But that kind of going to the pub on the way home, especially on the weekend kind of thing, that communal space, but also because you're often on public transport or you're walking through the city, which of course you aren't necessarily doing here in the US, for example. And if I want to go to a bar or something like that, you're often getting in a car and you're driving to a strip to go to a bar. Different if you're in New York, but in many metropolitan areas in the United States, of course, you're going between different strip malls or different neighborhoods within an automobile, which of course really affects your ability to be a flaneur, fly on the wall, taking things in, people, experiencing the city, experiencing otherness, difference, and breaking down those misconceptions or preconceptions. So I think I truly do miss that about many European cities, of which I agree. I think Paris is probably the one that has the most profound kind of interaction in that sense. Nice, thank you. That's an interesting answer. Well, let's talk a little bit about food. I've got two kind of food related questions for you. So the first one is you're a writer, and if you're having a blood sugar related meltdown / writer's block, what's your go-to snack to get you back on the track?
I am a cookie monster, an absolute cookie monster. I have tried to slow it down, to stop it, to take a break. It's impossible, particularly when I'm writing. And I'm not even a glamorous cookie monster. A Fudgio, and I can go for hours.
There you go. Well, that would probably have something to do with all that added sugar. You probably should be able to go for hours. Well, mine's equally bad, but on the different end of the spectrum, I think. I'm a crisps or chips, as they say here, monster. But I've tried to take it a little bit more healthy by buying or making plantain chips and crisps, which I think is a big lie, because you're still covering them in oil and salt and sugar. But there's a banana type thing in there somewhere. So that's mine. And I'm like, it's the potassium. I must need the potassium.
Yeah. And you've made it yourself.
I've had a go at it. Yeah. There's a few ways of doing it. You can fry them, or you can kind of air fry them as well. But I'm
from your own hand. You know what I mean? It's not just that.
Exactly. Well, I must have used a few calories, in the process of making them, so I deserve to. Let's be honest. More often than not, I'm going to the likes of a Trader Joe's and picking up the spicy jerk variety to keep me going late into the night when I'm having to write a presentation or something like that. But we all need these things to get us through those writer's block moments. Well, look, the final question I have for you today is a slightly culinary related one again, and it's really you're having a dinner party. And you can invite five people from history, anybody, dead or alive.
I don't know if I could have them all at the same party. Right? I think I might have to do
interesting proposition. You might need it. One of them might have to be a moderator.
Right? But
that's your job.
I would, Whitney Houston. Absolutely. Whitney Houston has felt for me like I have a personal relationship with Whitney in a sense. I feel that she comes to me in moments when I, her music will come on, and in these moments when I'm just I needed to hear this. And thank you, Whitney. And what I love is how supportive she is as a person and how positive she is. And that's that kind of energy that would have her at my dinner table anytime.
Let me just stop you there for a second. Do you have a favorite song by Whitney, or is it very dependent on the mood? Because I know she has the full spectrum.
You know, it depends, right? So that like I can go like it's not right, but it's okay when I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, and then there's other times when you know, I will always love you. Um or like there was a mix that came out later, Higher Love, which is, you know,
Mm.
which I find quite empowering. Million Dollar Bill, I find, you know, like I run to her, I run to you, like I run to her, I run to her, she runs to me. So, all of it, I love it all.
Right.
And let's see, so
So we got
Whitney,
with
yeah, Whitney, let's see, we got one. I would say, you know, I guess this is, you know, you'll understand the theme. Beyonce is another. Beyonce is someone that I also, like, my relationship isn't as personal with her, but I think she's somebody, what I appreciate, and, you know, when I think about like popular music and I think about, you know, aspects of hip hop, what I like is that they allow us to sort of find other aspects of ourselves on a dance floor. You know what I mean? And I think Beyonce is someone who lets us find our inner diva, you know, on the dance floor. And so she's also a very, you know, from what I see and what I've seen on Insta, you know, whatever, but a very like hardworking and positive person. It's also an energy I've come across, like, just, you know, in a mediatized way, but that I find very positive, that I like. Um, the painter Micheline Thomas is someone who I find very thoughtful. She's an American painter. Do you know?
no, I don't think so.
She I came across her work in Paris once. I was just sort of, you know, I was walking around, je flânais, and I came to a gallery and I went in and it was these beautiful paintings collage, with like glitter and diamonds and wallpaper, like pieces, of like portraits of Black women. That I think was called Jet Beauté Noire, that show. But she does a lot of sort of these large scale paintings, um, of Black women, and really sort of finding the a language of beauty, in Black culture, I'd say. And she's very thoughtful in interview, um, and I would love to sit down and talk with her. That's three.
Very. I'm just googling her right now.
Yeah.
It's added to the list. Thank you.
Yeah.
The great thing about interviewing people like this is, you know, you think you know a thing or two about culture, art history.
Yeah.
Every week I learn something new and add something else to the list. It's almost it's like my list is growing. But no,
Yeah.
that's cool. Thank you for opening my eyes to something new. So that's three. We've
Yeah,
slightly deviated from the diva, but
yes.
we've still got a strong cohort of women here. That's for sure.
Yes. And let's see. I would say, let's see. The final two, Prince.
Oh, okay. No way.
Prince. And I think I'd have to, like, he'd have to come over by himself and I'd have to just bring him dinner, you know, and speak what we would spoken to. But like, I mean, the talent, and he's such a complex figure, and, you know, fragile and powerful at the same time, and masculine and feminine. Someone I saw his last concert, you know, what is it, Prince and a Piano, or it was, you know, was wherever that concert was. I think it was called Prince and a Piano, something like that. And it was like one of the most generous concerts I'd ever seen, I'd ever experienced. And it was just him telling stories and playing, you know, playing his songs on a piano. It was beautiful.
That was in live in person. You saw that
Live,
as well.
yeah.
Wow.
Yes,
Okay, yeah.
it was one of those, he'd announce, like, he would announce a concert on a Monday for the Wednesday, and so you'd have to rush on the tickets. And I was like, I'm just going, whatever it takes. I got my ticket. It was like mid-semester. I was exhausted, but I was like, no, I'm going. And I went, I sat down, and I was just awash in that generosity that he shared. But it's that complexity, you know, like, I think we're all complex in those ways, and, you know, we aren't all always extroverts, always introverts, always on top of our game, or underwater. You know, we are complex, but his complexities, I think you just see it. It's just right there. I would love to, experience it in some way.
Yeah, cool. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I got one last. Who would that be? Cardi B. And so Cardi B is like also someone like I love apparently, positive thinking, hardworking Black women. And I think Cardi B she's someone who I wrote about a lot. I've written about like her nails and the transformation of nail culture and its shift into mainstream culture and what that implies. I've written about like Bodak Yellow, her first song, like sort of in my analysis of Black female rappers and luxury. But what I appreciate in her, and again, it's from a mediated perspective, but that I think she's really, like a thoughtful person who wants to do good, and wants to share, like whether it's politically, like share her ideas. And she's not, she doesn't present as like the expert on things. She asks questions. She wants to know. She wanted people to go out and vote. But she seems like somebody who just wants to make the world good, and to a certain extent, you know what I mean? Like, I feel that in her.
She genuinely feels quite authentic, or like a real one, as they say, come across. You can imagine that, I mean, obviously in a mediated landscape, and her presenting her own, mythologizing herself in certain ways too. But yeah, you kind of imagine that she's not too far removed from, pre-signed Cardi B in many ways. Yeah. Imagine that she still retained that authenticity. Speaking about Bodak Yellow and luxury, I wonder if she brings the leopard to the from the video to the to the party, to the dinner party too. That's my last thing of that video. And thinking about luxury is that she's walking around with a leopard on a leash from recollection. Well, that is going to be quite the dinner party, which I imagine would probably either end in violence or in some fantastic conversation and a hell of a karaoke
dinner parties.
A hell of a karaoke session potentially. I hope you can hold a note, that's for sure. But Nigel, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today on In Conversation. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you very much. For me too.
No, just wonderful chatting with you, sort of discussing these topics and getting to know you a bit better. So I just urge everyone to do a bit of Googling and search Nigel, and also go and check out Canadian Critical Luxury Studies, and of course the journal, Luxury Studies Journal, at intellectbooks.com. But for now, thank you so much. I hope we can have you on again in the future, and good luck with any of the projects that you're working on.
Thank you very much for this chat. It's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you all next time.